Welcome back to Land Matters, the podcast of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm your host, Anthony Flynn. Technology has long been intertwined with the evolution of the city, long before the notion of the smart city and the Internet of Everything. If you think about it, traffic lights were transformative technology a century ago, and they're still with us. Now we're in an age where traffic and transit management is using artificial intelligence. There are apps for finding a parking space or getting a pothole filled, 3D printing and other magic in building construction. But really now the question is whether technology can tackle some even bigger things to come to the rescue in the current big crisis facing humankind, climate change. In this episode, we'll talk with Kara Swisher from the New York Times, host of the Sway podcast, and foremost authority on all things digital. For some time now, she's been predicting that big tech will really jump into this area and help save the planet, as governments alone appear to be unable to get that job done thus far. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Kara, thank you for joining the conversation at Land Matters.
Well, thank you, Anthony.
First, since the topic is climate change and the movie came out recently, I can't resist. What did you think of the creepy tech company executive portrayed in the film Don't Look Up?
I thought it was perfect. I actually talked to Adam McKay about it quite a bit, the executive, and who he was and who he was trying to go for. Adam is the director. And I think he portrayed it beautifully, this idea, this sort of benign goodness that really masks malevolence and greed. And I think his little tics were funny when he was questioned. I think the whole point of that character was that there are people on this planet that are more powerful than governments, that are governments. And in this case, they sort of mashed together a whole bunch of people, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, into one fantastic package that Mark Rylance, who is the actor who portrayed him, did beautifully, especially his small little stutters and then turning very dark when someone questioned what he was doing, especially the Jennifer Lawrence character.
Back to what good things might come out of Silicon Valley and elsewhere. You've said you're interested in what big tech can do about the climate crisis. How do you think these big companies might help? You predicted in a New Year's Eve essay in the New York Times in 2019 that the first big trillionaire might actually be a green tech trillionaire. And I agree, it seems like there are incredible opportunities here.
Yeah, I don't think that Silicon Valley is a good place. I don't think that you've obviously seen the impact of so many inventions has been so deleterious on our society. I was kind of appealing to their greed, which is constant and continual. And so the idea of it is that there's all these opportunities in creating tech related to climate change, and not in things that you think of normally, not in just making the metaverse so nobody has to move, or electric cars, or all kinds of things that they're already working on already. But in the idea of how you can really change materials and things like that, that a lot of these answers are going to be in how we build things, how we make things, how we consume things, how things are distributed. And tech really does play a part in it. I just made up trillionaire. I only did that only to put a challenge into them. But it seems like it's ripe with opportunity, whether it's carbon capture, electric cars, whether it's how people go to work or don't go to work. You've seen what this pandemic has done. It really has accelerated the idea that we're not going to be going to work anymore. Well, that's certainly a climate help. But what does that lead to, and how do we build a society in that way? These are issues that are not going to solely be fixed by tech, but that there's a lot of technology that's going to go into deciding whether it's a seawall in Miami, how to build the right seawall and make it work, to less consumption, to carbon capture, to space travel. All kinds of things are all within the bailiwick of the tech industry.
One thing that occurred to me was that the social media platforms might start setting standards with regard to disinformation and climate denial and along the lines of COVID and vaccines. Do you think that might be possible?
No, they don't care. If they wanted to fix it, they could fix it. Their whole idea is anything goes still, even though they've done some to battle with COVID, it was under pressure. And they've done some anti-vax stuff, it was under pressure. Some of the misinformation, the big lie, it goes on and on again. Climate denial will just be part of the same thing. Let everybody speak. They don't understand there's really malevolent forces at work who are actually gaming these systems. And in the case of elections, it makes sense that anybody who wants to win an election wants to create confusion and disinformation. In this case, there's real believers in this and want to push back what needs to be done throughout our society. And so, no, they're not going to help us. They're not here to help us.
Along those lines, things can also go horribly wrong, right? I'm thinking of Elizabeth Kolbert's recent book where she worries about things like blasting reflective particles into the atmosphere to block the sun. Should we be worried or just let the creativity and innovation flow?
We want innovation to flow. I had someone the other day who was talking about putting trash in space and all this other stuff. There's all kinds of ideas, and that's great. That's a great thing. It's interesting that she talked about that. Neil Stephenson, who was the first guy who created the metaverse, who thought it up, he's a fiction writer. His book is about that, a billionaire who does something to the atmosphere to stop global warming. He shoots sulfur into the air in a big giant sulfur gun. I'm not going to say how it ends, but it's not good. At the same time, some of it's good. And so I think the issues around it is that it's great to do all this stuff, but it has to be done with the cooperation with government and citizens, because we can't let these quasi-governments like technologists just suddenly shoot sulfur up or put reflective particles or things like that. And I think actually that movie was very good that way, is who was making the decisions on what to do about that asteroid heading toward the Earth. And in the end, it doesn't matter, right? But they didn't do anything. And I think that was just used as a metaphor for what's happening. But it was about power, too, about people that have power, that have interests that do not align with more of the interests for most of the human race. And so you're going to see ideas about blasting reflective particles. You're going to see carbon capture ideas. You're going to see all kinds of ideas around how electric cars should go, how they should move. Some of it is going to be done because it's in the interests of certain businesses versus whether it's the right thing to do. But I do think more ideas, the better. You just never know whether it's new food, the way we make food, or how we deal with healthcare and things like that. You don't know where the best idea is going to come from. So you have to balance that, but you just can't let them do whatever they want. That could have really bad effect on the rest of us.
Well, we're all about land here at the Lincoln Institute, and land use is a big part of any response to climate crisis. I'm thinking of deforestation and land clearing. And I guess I was envisioning a great big dashboard to monitor what's going on in the world.
And it's happened, not just Google Maps, but there's all kinds of, the world is so monitored now, and there's more to come with not just cameras, not just surveillance equipment of people, but there's all this stuff being worked on. Someone was telling me the other day about these little tiny nanotechnologies you throw into say there's a nuclear meltdown. Instead of people going in there, we'll be able to see and monitor and take things. Our whole world is monitored. We know what's coming. We see what's happening. We see the damage. I once spent an entire day looking at Google images of the plastic island in the middle of the Pacific, of all the plastic all moving together. So we're aware of where things are. I think we can use it to help us really understand what's happening versus anecdotal stuff that often happens when we make policy decisions. There's a really interesting company. It's monitoring land use around agriculture, what's being grown where and what's working and what's not working. More data, the better in this case. The question is, what do we do once we have it? Once we see what's happening or something's happening. But we do have an instant way to understand the impact of fires, the impact of drought, etc. And some of it's really quite astonishing how much good information we have about what's happening on our planet.
There's also the matter of how green or not these companies actually are themselves in their manufacturing, workplaces. Say, in the case of Amazon, the truck fleet being electrified. We've seen how much energy a Google search takes, let alone Bitcoin. How are these companies doing on that front? And is there a danger of greenwashing?
Yes, danger is happening. Right, when they make all those announcements, the idea of recycling and the obsolescence that has been built into so much electronics, that's where it started, really. But I do think a lot of these campuses, if you visit them, they're very fast forward compared to other workplaces around the country in terms of solar. Google was the first place I saw any company using solar power to do things. People parked under these solar panels, for example, and they were using bicycles first. They were using electric cars to get around. They are sort of eating their own dog food in that regard. I think the issue is that, again, are we going to have workplaces the way we're going to have them? Amazon will, of course, electrify its fleet. They will figure out ways to make cardboard. Everybody has like a cardboard mountain in their house from Amazon. So they're going to figure out new ways. And it's also good for business because it costs them less. I think some of these companies are committed, like Microsoft announced that it was getting zero emissions by a certain date. They do have to start stating their intentions, whether it's Disney, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's any of these companies. So you can call it greenwashing, but it puts the intentionality on top of the company to be doing this kind of stuff. And then figuring out innovative ways that lots of companies could share among and between each other about how to lessen the impact of carbon. The Gates interview was really interesting because he's like, you can't get to just 20% of it. You have to get to zero emissions or else we're essentially. And that's the truth. It's the truth. It's not just technology companies. Clothes manufacturing is a real problem. Materials how we make construction stuff, concrete, things like that. There's all this stuff that has this sort of green premium on it right now. So say jet fuel, for example. how can you get the premium down to the regular price and closer together? It's happening in electric cars for sure, autonomous cars. The prices are starting to fall in line with regular gas fuel cars. And so that's what we have to do is get these green premiums down to a price that is affordable without subsidies, right? So that we don't do it just because it's the right thing. Although there's nothing wrong with that either, by the way, to have the government start to encourage these kind of things.
So 2022 might be the year of really finally, truly addressing climate change. And it sounds like you're quite focused on that topic as well.
There's very serious issues around how many people are on this planet, what's going to happen. You see it every day, whether it's melting glaciers or, shifts in all kinds of things, or the rising sea levels, et cetera, or the unusual storms. We really do have to start thinking about how we live, how we communicate with each other, where we live, how we live, and how we make everything from food to clothes to concrete to jet fuel. What can be done from an innovative point of view to get us to zero emissions, which is the only way, these carbon emissions, if we don't get it down to zero, then we have to be innovative in dealing with the consequences by building seawalls, by building where there's extremes. I really recommend this Neil Stephenson book because it imagines the repercussions of a climate challenged society. We're either going to be innovating in a negative way or we're going to innovate in a positive way. Either way, we have to innovate or else we die, essentially. And so that's why I think a lot of stuff that has to happen and how we should be doing it now in advance, just the way we should have probably been prepared for a COVID, whatever pandemic was coming. We have to assume that we are going to have massive climate problems going forward and how we solve them in the moment, which would be, as I said, seawalls or more efficient air conditioning, whatever it happens to be. Or we come up with new ways to make things. It's going to be critical for the human race. And again, space is another thing we should be thinking about, living on other planets, moving to other planets, although I'm staying right here.
Yes, I'd prefer to stay right here too. Kara Swisher, thank you for talking tech at Land Matters. Climate change and land's role in both reducing emissions and adapting to new realities is a big focus for the Lincoln Institute. You can learn more about our work in land, water, and climate by going to our website, lincolninst.edu, and navigating to our work. We've also been interested in the role of technology in cities and the continuing stewardship of the earth. Check out the City Tech column by Rob Walker in Landlines and the great work of the new Center for Geospatial Solutions, also on the Lincoln Institute website. And perhaps the easiest thing to remember, our Twitter handle @LandPolicy. And that's it for this episode of the Land Matters podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Flint. I hope you'll rate, review, subscribe, and recommend the show to anyone interested in climate solutions and technology and all the issues we talked about with Kara Swisher today. Until next time, thanks for listening.